Let's go. Because my adventures with capitalism today, this weekend, I am um I'm thoroughly pissed. Yeah, yeah. There we go. There we go. All right, so let's actually work to get this shit started. Oh,
Still an American taboo. Not so much, says Professor Richard Wolff, host of a hit podcast on the subject. Then, nor was it ever, says Nation columnist John Nichols, author of The S Word and an
actually,
F word for me, in which I propose renaming capitalism. Welcome to our program.
let's start again. This is
Today on the
more.
Laura Flanders Show, is socialism still an American taboo? Not so much, says Professor Richard Wolff, host of a hit podcast on the subject. Then, nor was it ever, says Nation columnist John Nichols, author of The S Word and an F word for me, in which I propose renaming capitalism. Welcome to our program.
All right, let's hear the conversation.
Bernie Sanders, who calls himself an independent socialist, is running for president of the United States. Fox News is still out there calling President Obama a socialist. The U.S. is making peace.
All right, so this is actually from 2000 and this is from 2015. You can actually see the time frame there, and god damn, the fact that we were having these discussions, what, 4 years ago, and it still hasn't changed. It's actually become more accepted to actually for people to call themselves democratic socialists or social democrats and things of that nature. It's become more and more accepted. Just turn my headphones up just a little bit better so I can hear the volume. It's not like it's just straight music. So let's continue.
With
Go
the
ahead.
socialism of Cuba, but saber rattling still over the socialism of Venezuela. Our next guest is here to help us make sense of all these different socialisms. Richard D. Wolffe is professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs at the New School University here in New York. He's authored or co-authored more than a dozen books, including his most recent Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown 2010 to 14. He also hosts.
So here she's giving his bona fides, as you saw it, CV, his resume of how damn this motherfucker is actually reading a lot of motherfucking books in the time it takes. I haven't even read my first book or finished my first, um, I guess, finished my first graphic novel. But let's continue.
Hosts the weekly Economic Update podcast, one of my favorites. Welcome to the program. Welcome back, Rick.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Oh, he's going
One
by
of the
Rick
things
here.
you talk about so
Cool.
brilliantly in your podcast is the question of education as a commodity. Just quickly, can you talk about how that commodity, that value, is spread about or not?
All right, so a lot of people. I was once one of those people that just detest like college and stuff like that. It's really because I hated the system we had in place that turned education into a commodity. It's not that I hated college itself. I hated the cost it would actually take. And the thing about it is, I recognize it was, I hate the commodification of college in order to make it where you had to get it and you had to get thousands of dollars of loans. And in some cases now, hundreds of thousands of dollars or up to $100,000 worth of loan in order to prove your value, prove your worth. Now, someone such as myself who actually enjoys learning, if it was a way for me to go to college for free, say like with certain, you know, fuck, I'm getting ass biased. With certain presidential candidates offering free state tuition, free state universities, shit, of course I'll go back to college. Probably do psychology if I could, but let's continue.
Yeah, I think it's a catastrophe, frankly, that education is understood as some object that you buy like any other commodity. So you decide whether it's worth it or not, and you think about it as an individual. Should I spend the money? Will it pay off? Education is something that changes the community, changes the whole society. We want to live in a society where people are educated, where people can enjoy a vast array of things of life and bring their own creativity out for themselves and for everybody else. It's the quintessential social arrangement, the way we relate to one another. If we want to live in a good society, a commitment to first-class education is the first thing we would do if we understood the importance to all of our lives and not just to the narrow question of making a living or making a profit. That's the tragedy. That's why in our times now, when we're having economic difficulty, we as a nation are cutting education when anyone with half a brain would know that the future of the United States in a world economy depends more on the quality and quantity of educated people we produce than on anything else. We are shooting ourselves in the foot.
Okay, I have to stop him, not because he's making a point that I disagree with, no, because he's actually making it's a very long point. You want to have a productive society, educate them. You want to have a society that's built on fears that turn into good little drones and workers. You you make education bad. So, or you make it expensive, where only people who have the inherent wealth from previous generations can actually afford it without going into debt or actually have the time or actually have, well, I guess it would all be considered resources, wouldn't it? In other words, because I am because my family has money to actually put in towards me actually, I don't know. I'm trying to think and actually do this because if my family have money to actually put in the effort to actually maybe get me a tutor or make sure I go to a school which actually has more resources devoted to making sure that a child can actually get this information, attention, and prerequisite skills to being a college student, then you know maybe maybe oh shit, where the fuck did he go? Then maybe I would actually do better. And then of course there are some people who are just shit people who even though they have all the all the money in the world all the time, they're just still stupid as fuck. But when you commodify, when you take that when you decommodify education, it becomes not a you know status quo for the people who already have those things, already have wealth, always have power. That basically it becomes basically a transfer of wealth from one generation of people who have that status, money, and power to another generation. When you make it where it's decommodified and it just becomes a right versus a privilege, more people are able to do things where they are able to get those certifications, able to get those knowledge, able to get those fields of study. But let's continue.
Because we're so focused on the profit loss statement, we don't understand the broader meaning and significance and benefit to all of us of a good education system for everybody.
No, it's a classic example of we versus me thinking. We in the U.S. tend to do the me thinking, but these socialist countries we're talking about focus more on the we. You're seeing extraordinary turnout to your sessions around the country teaching about socialism. How do you explain it?
I think Americans are fine.
What Laura actually said there was actually pretty key. Even in countries where, say, Germany and France, in these countries that have big corporate sectors, they still value having the public educated. They value having more educated workers because with more educated workers, you have more workers that can actually perform more dedicated tasks. The education not only helps out those workers, it also helps out to have better engineers or have more, just more competent workers. Do you lose in profitability in some cases? Yes, but what you lose in that profitability, you make up in other areas where the profit actually helps. But let's continue.
Finally coming to terms with the fact that this isn't just another economic downturn, that this is a long, deep crisis, that there isn't an upturn around the corner despite all the talk about recovery, and they're asking questions like intelligent people would do. What's going on? Why is this happening? And then the big one, could we do better than this? And suddenly, since I deal with those questions, I'm in demand, and I won't deny there's an ego gratification here that is part of the story.
Well, it's pretty fascinating. I mean, I've been to a bunch of your monthly updates, which are live events in a church basement in New York City once a month. The crowd has done nothing but grow, at least this year, week after week. You've got hundreds of people cramming in that room to talk about what is socialism, what's happening in our economy, and what are some of the ways of understanding.
So, and that's the thing. That's one of the key points that happens with Dr. Wolff. He does have it where he has people come in. He does do the weekly economic. He does a bi-monthly, not bi-monthly.
Stand.
What is it? Alternatively monthly. I don't know. Every other month he actually does a economic update. He does an economic update specifically in a church basement, and those always have great turnout. Sometimes in some cases where it's actually more, I think it grew so much that they had to find a new location since 2015. But you see him on so many different on so different many talk shows. Now he's being invited on public, not public, but on mainstream medias, because this message isn't going anywhere. It's actually becoming more and more popular of socialism, and it's not the whole we want the government to take over things. It's like, no, we as a society need to start looking out for each other. And part of that is not, well, the government needs to take ownership of shit. It's like, no, fuck the corporations. And that's some shit that's happening. Fuck. Anyway, let's continue.
What's going on now that people are paying the attention that they are.
Well, I was hesitant, for example, to schedule a discussion of socialism, but so many people asked that I realized, okay, the taboo has been broken. It was unacceptable in America for most of the post war period since 1945 to talk about this because you had a kind of aroma that you were being unpatriotic, that you were not a lover of our country, and all of that kind of talk, which was effective. It shut people down, it freaked them out, it frightened them. And even at the end of the Cold War, when the big bugaboo of the Soviet Union had imploded on itself, it still seemed, decade after decade, it's been 25 years now, that it was still impossible. And then, with the crash of 2008, everything has changed.
I mean, it is.
So that's actually one of the key points that you see a lot of the change because of what happened in 2008, because of the fact that you know basically there is such a loss of wealth from the middle and lower class that people are looking for different things. People are looking for a different way. My fault. The fact that nobody in a financial sector paid any costs, they even got bonuses, has actually been one of the driving forces that caused a resurgence in socialism. Think about think about the fact that you see so much of the like Occupy Wall Street happened because of this shit. Let's continue.
Fairly significant that a man who has called himself for years an independent socialist is running for president of the United States, albeit on the Democratic Party ticket. What do you make of the Sanders candidacy?
I think it's the same phenomena as I'm encountering, that he realizes that there's two ways of saying it. Either the taboo against socialism has lifted, and I'm sure that that's part of what's going on. But the other part is all of the rest of American politics has moved several steps to the right, so that a man like Bernie Sanders is all that there is left of center that's running, and otherwise there'd be nobody, and he is looking to cash in on a gathering of people for whom everybody else is so problematic that he looks, by comparison,
So
to be the right one.
So let's define a few terms.
So let's actually just think about that. The field, the Overton window in the U.S. is so far to the fucking right that Bernie Sanders is just offering shit that you see in other countries with like just other what we wouldn't even think there are socialist countries. Like seriously. Now of course we have now on the 2020 ticket you see Elizabeth Warren, you see some people on the Democratic ticket who have, I don't want to say they have more right, more left wing ideas, not solely left wing, but they have more left wing ideals. Like, for instance, you get Kamala Harris, who, not Kamala, oh God, I am so sorry, but you get um, fuck, Tulsi Gabbard, who in and of themselves, who is pretty much somebody who wants to actually, you know, encourage peace in, you know, these Middle Eastern countries. Now, some of her takes on other parts, yeah, we definitely should have a talk about. But you also hear how Medicare for all, how a lot of senators or representatives or all these other people actually go for Medicare for all, and then they actually change their position. Like, so you actually get these things. You actually get a lot of these people looking to cash in on Bernie Sanders' ideas. But let's continue.
Terms. I mean, what's the difference between socialism in Western Europe, Northern Europe, and Venezuela and Cuba, say, Latin America?
So this is one of the things that Professor Wolff excels at. This whole explanation between the two. So yeah, let's see how this goes.
Well, I
Is
think
it the same animal?
it is and it isn't. Socialism has a long history, and it starts before Karl Marx, even though his name is associated with it. But I think the most important thing to understand is from a relatively few people in a few parts of Europe calling themselves socialists, sort of at the end of the 18th, early 19th century, over the next 150 years, the thing spreads globally. That's an incredibly short time historically for an idea to become part of the life of every country on this planet. And if things go that quickly, then there's no alternative but to see people interpreting it differently, depending on their own religions, their own cultures, their own histories, what Cubans mean by socialism, what Venezuelans mean, what Swedes mean, what Nigerians mean. That couldn't possibly be the same. They don't interpret Christianity the same. They don't interpret almost anything the same. And I think there you find the explanation for why the word socialism is on the one hand so very attractive to people and yet so differently interpreted.
Now, there is that word social right there in the middle. And that has something to do with it, right?
Absolutely.
What?
Well, the early critics of capitalism, I'm going to take a step back. Every system like capitalism, whether it's slavery or feudalism or any other systems we've had as our economic arrangements.
So you actually hear. Let's listen to this explanation. You actually saw that a lot of people did have it where they had different explanations and different reasons for even Christianity. But now it's because you see socialism. It's it has to be the same everywhere. You can only give it one explanation. But let's continue.
Have always had people who loved them and people who felt we could do better. There's nothing new about a criticism of capitalism. It was part of the birth of that system itself. And the people who were critical, who weren't happy about how capitalism was evolving already in the 19th century, looked around for a word, because that's part of the problem. How do we capture in a word what we don't like about capitalism? And the word, there were many candidates, but the one that ended up being in people's minds the way to grasp that idea was to say, in capitalism, everybody is for himself, herself as an individual. Put the community out of your mind, put the collectivity out of your mind.
Margaret Thatcher famously said there is no such thing as community,
Absolutely.
only
You're
individual.
on your own. You're on your own goal. You're going to build yourself. We're all for ourselves. It's Adam Smith. If we all.
So that's actually interesting. The etymology of the word socialism, where it's, of course, with capitalism, it's yes, one one for oneself. It's all. It's all. Damn. Did I just figure out a snide little joke with Gara? Love oneself till he became myself is the whole motherfucking village. Oh wow, I've just garbled this shit out. But let's continue.
Do what's good for us individually, it'll somehow magically work out to be the best for everybody. Socialists were the people who always said, no, 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 that's nutty. If you want the community to be good, if you want the society you live in to be good, you have to work at that. That has to be part of what you care about, what you give yourself to. If you give yourself only to yourself, you will end up maybe being rich, but you will be the loneliest person on the planet. And the
So if you only think of oneself, then in a lot of cases, you as a person may actually be it may actually be to your detriment and not your help. Hmm. Let's continue.
criticisms of capitalism settled around this word. We're not individualists. We are committed to a good community, a good society. We are socialists.
And it also has wrapped up in the idea an idea of central planning, that we will plan society somehow, right?
Yes, because if you care about the society, then you have to work some plan of how to go about making a good society. You know, I like to point out to people that whenever a corporate leader tries to figure out how to organize his or her corporation, they get together a group of people who spend all day, every day, planning.
So this is one of those things where it's just like, and I've actually done the video game I've done, and I may even actually do fuck, what is that thing? Um Tropico. Like, a planned society isn't necessarily a bad idea. That's not necessarily bad. Just because your society is actually planned, it just means that instead of having the government do it, you have a private corporation do it. But let's continue.
The community of this corporation, the thousands of employees, the relationships with the vendors. Capitalism is not the negation of planning. Capitalism does planning, but always for a few people, for the benefit of the few. It does not socialist planning, where the whole idea was you plan for the benefit of the community, of the totality.
So give us an example. I mean, I get it. So, slavery took a lot of planning. It was a decision. Give us an example of planning by shareholders now that maybe would be different if we took it out of their hands.
Well, at this point, shareholders have become ancillary to most companies. The planning is in the hands of a group of people that are elected by shareholders. They elect this thing called the board of directors, 15, 20 people that sit at the top of the pyramid of all the major corporations anywhere in the world. And to them is assigned the task, plan. Decide where you're going to produce. Decide how you're going to produce. They organize the technological choices the company makes. They decide who to employ, how to employ, what to pay, what to change, what price to charge. All the big decisions are made by a tiny group of people or their assistants. So everything is planned, but two key things.
So let's actually just address that. A lot corporations are not, and this is what I actually don't understand that much. You see corporate people who say corporations are great and the government is bad, and we should take the government out of this, that, and that decision. Where it's more along the lines of a lot of the a lot of the things that you see that people want to take out of the hands of corporations, they want to turn back around and put that power, those decisions, in the hands of out of the government. They want to take that power and put it in the hands of corporations instead of actively looking to make decisions in and of themselves and actively looking to make sure that you have the power and the responsibility of making choices that actually help facilitate a better life for you. You're not winning by saying, "Oh, we're taking it out of the hands of the government." You're actively putting it in the hands of corporations in a lot of cases. We want the government to stop I guess making sure we can have clean water and relying on corporations to actually make sure that they get their act together because reasons. I don't know. Let's continue.
It's planned by a tiny minority of people without the participation of everybody else, and it is planned for their benefit as corporate executives or for the shareholders that gave them their jobs as board of directors. So we have planning, but it is for the private benefit of the few, and the whole idea of socialism was planning for everybody. But it's not planning or not planning, that's a mistake.
And how does environmental crisis affect all of this? I mean, one of the situations we have right now is students and activists and others petitioning oil companies and gas companies to please pay attention to global warming. This is an odd way to plan our future as a planet.
Right, and it's perfect fodder for this socialism versus capitalism. Because if your only interest is to plan to make the most money you can, the most profit for your company, the most income for your shareholders, then you put aside the other questions. You don't worry about that. I mean, the worst example in the world is the shift of the last 20 years from producing the clothing we all wear here, nearby, to producing it at 10,000 miles away.
So this is actually a good point that Professor Wolff is making. When you're actually doing a lot of, when you're doing a lot of, when the motive is profit, well then you're gonna do everything you can to do a profit. Fuck the planet. Fuck future generations. Give me my shit for my shareholders this quarter. Hello, video game companies. Let's continue.
In Bangladesh or China or India, and then bringing it 10,000 miles back, wasting enormous amounts of energy, polluting the air and the water as we do it. That was profitable. That's why it was done. But it wasn't a plan, because anyone with even a little bit of ecological sense would have said, to save the planet, which we do as a planned outcome of our society, that's crazy. That only makes sense if you're planning how to make profit for a company. Then you do that. And I think for socialists, it's always been, of course, the planet has to be taken care of. That's part of what it means to take care of a society, is to preserve your relationship to nature. The private capitalist is not worried about the society. That's what capitalism is. And that's why capitalists have an instinctual resistance against ecological and environmental thinking, because it's very close to the old socialist idea that what ought to be decided is what's good for the community as a whole, rather than what makes money for a minority.
This is some of what Naomi Klein writes about, and this
Absolutely.
changes everything. The other thing you have to do is build political power. I'm looking at Spain, I'm looking at Greece, even Alberta, Canada, and seeing other countries are way further along in building movements and parties related to those movements, expressing some of these ideas than we are here. What's holding us back?
I think that we haven't yet accepted that the crisis is as deep and the crisis is as long as it actually is. And
The crisis is deep and long. It is very deep and long. I thought we was talking about my penis. Anyway, let's go.
I understand that. You know, I'm an American. I understand my fellow citizens. They don't want to see what's a scary sight. They don't want to face what's a scary. And I'm noticing it took a long time for the Greeks to go through a very bad struggle before Syriza becomes an important political movement. The same thing in Spain before Podemos does. The same thing in Alberta before the New Democratic Party galvanizes. And I think there are signs that things that have been percolating slowly have suddenly speeded up. The leader in Alberta, the leader in Spain, they're all women. They're women coming to the fore, playing a role in a left-wing rejection of all that has come before. I think it's accumulating. When it goes very fast. Everybody was surprised by the outcome in Alberta. Couldn't imagine it. The government in Spain still hasn't made a statement because it can't get over what happened in the month of May to the elections there.
Two major cities now represented electing people who will be mayors, who are women from the left, one a former communist, one a former fighter of evictions.
Absolutely. And the fighter for evictions in Barcelona is...
So this is actually key things. And yes, of course, they had a setback in England over the Brexit elections, the snap elections that they they fed what they had. Wow. And, Corbyn actually did fall. But that's not, that's the, that's not the exception to the rule. Those, that's the exception to the rule. Those are not the rule. Left governments, socialist, populist left, as we did with previous videos with Mark Blight, those are becoming more of the rules versus the exceptions. And yes, you have it where you have Trump, who is a populist in and of itself, fake populist, but a populist in and of itself. But it is actually becoming more and more where you see, you see people are actually becoming more and more focused on populism. But let's continue.
Is becoming a regional hero, inspiring people. It's remarkable. And Syriza, with all the negative publicity it gets, is also fighting to change Greece from the top to the bottom. And even opposition parliamentarians in Greece acknowledge that this left wing government, which they don't like because it's left wing, has had more courage to fight to free Greece from being the small, poor corner of Europe than all of the previous governments. And that's why the support is there. And I think we will be surprised in the United States by how fast it goes when that last little moment comes. The way we were in the autumn of 2011, when Occupy Wall Street came literally out of nowhere and became the determining metaphor for what was going on in the next 4 or 5 months.
Rick Wolff, thanks so much for coming in. It's always great to talk with you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Laura.
You can get more information about.
All right. So, yeah, that was actually pretty cool. And I didn't realize this was half the video, but that's okay. That's okay. I never actually finished watching this video, so yeah. Let's um let's go to another video as soon as I get to a better place with this race. And that isn't it. All right, all right. So let's go to another video.